Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the second session on our Q&A. We are here at Iqra Studios in Bradford, and the topic is, as it says on the tin, questions and answers. For those of you who may not know the number, I've been told it's streaming somewhere, but in case you've missed it, it is 01274 214 299. And though one or two calls that we did receive, for some reason we didn't get through, just please try again, inshallah, and we'll try our best to catch you this time round. So what we're going to do is just finish off what I was discussing earlier before the break, which was about this whole concept of exhuming the body and then transferring the body to another country. And there was a third component to this whole discussion, and it slipped my mind. Fortunately, the 10-second, 20-second break that I had brought it fresh back. And the third part was the wasiyah, bequesting, or the wish that people make on their deathbed. So for instance, a person says that, look, don't bury me here, bury me in India, or bury me in Pakistan, or bury me in Bangladesh. They make that decision. And then the family members are somewhat perturbed by not carrying out the wishes of the recently deceased. Should the family ignore the Sharia ahkam that we've just described? One is the exhumation if the body's been exhumed, which is rare. But the only reason I mention that is because it's the particular mas'ala I dealt with yesterday. The second point, which is more common, which is the transfer of the body. So should they ignore that and let the body go through those four issues which are problematic and just carry out the deceased wishes? Well, the answer is quite simple. I'm sure you would have gathered by now, is that no, they do not take on board the deceased wishes and they ignore them. Reason being is that if a person asks somebody to do something which is impermissible, whether they are alive or whether they are dying or whether they are dead, I appreciate a dead person can't speak from the grave, but in case they've left something in writing which is read only after the person has passed away, like a will, for example, then those wishes should not be fulfilled. Rather, what the Sharia demands should be fulfilled. So, for example, a person who's dying says that transfer my body across to X country when I pass away, because that's the country I'm from, or that's the country where my parents are buried in, or that's the village that I have some association with. Then that should be ignored. Similar, if a person who's passing away says that I don't want X son or Y daughter to get a share of the inheritance. Why? Because these last 6 months or last few years that I've been dying, you've been there for me talking to a particular son, or you've been there for me talking to a particular daughter, and that other son and that other daughter hasn't been here for me, so I want them cut out from the inheritance. I only want the inheritance to be split between the two of you. So then obviously this is the person on the deathbed. So when the person passes away and now obviously inheritance is being looked at, then the brother or sister, whoever the message was left with, say to the other siblings that you have been cut out from the inheritance because that was mum's wish on her deathbed, or that was dad's wish on his deathbed. Again, those wishes should not be taken into consideration. Or that the person has written a will which has been left with a solicitor or left with a religious scholar or however, and that person then opens the will after the person has been deceased and realizes that the person has not divided the inheritance as the Sharia dictates, but rather decided on their own whims and desires, or on how they feel that the people have treated them whilst alive. Now, in that case again, those people who are now the guardians, those people who are now the executors of the will, should do it according to the Sharia. There is one small section that I need to add here though, is that obviously if a person has been to the solicitors and had a will constructed by solicitors and then that is there, that is a legally binding document in UK British courts. Now, even if a person was to then say, well, my mother or my father, they did not really understand what they were doing and they should have done it according to the Sharia, so now I want to change that, they obviously cannot change that, because the British law, we live in Britain, British law will obviously dictate if the person has put that will together, and therefore the will be carried out. What should be explained to the new inheritors according to this will is that what this person decided was wrong. And therefore, what you should do is redistribute it according to the Sharia. So we can see here that even though the deceased, whether dying or died, had made bequests, but those bequests, because they were impermissible, have been ignored. And in fact, the religiously sound version has been given instead. Now, what if the family members decide that? So that the deceased hasn't even decided that. The deceased had not said anything at all with regards to that. What about in those circumstances? Well, before we discuss that, I've been told that we have a caller waiting. So let's take this call first, inshallah, and then hopefully I will remember where I left this off and pick it up from there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, caller.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I want to ask you a question, but before that, I want to say that why I know ulmas and scholars, they have more knowledge and they know best what they're doing. But why is like Imam Hussein and Sahaba and all of them, the way they made sacrifices for Islam and for sake of Islam, how they sacrificed everything. Why is lacking in our society, in our generation? Why we don't nurture those kind of qualities in our new generation? And because whole Muslim Ummah, there is no Hussainiyat, so Yazidiyat is so strong. And we are helpless, we can't even do anything, we don't have our platform, and we are in the middle of crisis from all sides, and I think is lacking of that knowledge, the one from our Prophet's grandson and Sahaba, the way they made sacrifices. We are not doing anything to persuade our business community to how much they need to sacrifice to spread Islam, how much they need to sacrifice for the sake of this Ummah. We fail to even persuade business community, and I know you know how to do things better than me. I'm not a scholar, but overall, these things are killing us. These things are hopeless. These things oppress Muslims, and you can see the situation in the whole world. Even though we are in billions, but we don't have our say. We don't have any platform. We are quiet on very, very crucial issues. We think that staying quiet is going to solve our problem, but we need to do something.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying, sister, and I understand the observation that you've made and also how you feel. And it's fair to say, obviously, that we're in a particular situation now, or particular area where we see the Muslims, whether it's in foreign lands, abroad, or whether more local lands, whether it's Islamophobia in the Western kind of world, or whether it's oppression in the Eastern world, we do see the Muslim community seems to be at the...
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you, sister.
Brother, one thing is that, even we can't even persuade Muslim governments to give, the ulama ikram a proper wage like they give to any other department. They should... I notice so many things even in Muslim countries that a scholar or a masjid imam, he don't have proper salary from anywhere. They run on donation. It's shame for us that we leave that gap and don't even care.
Yeah, no. As I said, I hear what you're saying. I hope you can hear me. Yep. So you should be able to hear me through your TV or your device that you're watching this show on. But I hear what you're saying, and as I said, it's a fair observation to make. And I'm sure that we could sit here and mention the numerous reasons why we are in the situation that we find ourselves in. Whatever the causes have been historically that we are in the situation that we find ourselves in, we obviously have to always be optimistic. That's something which the Muslim tradition teaches us, is to always be optimistic. Even when one feels that every time they knock on the door, that door does not open, we should be somewhat optimistic. When, for example, Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam was running away from Zulaykha and he ran towards the door was locked. He knows the door was locked, but yet he still ran towards that door. So we are in a time, and you can give so many examples, all the Anbiya, what they were trialed and tested with and the difficulties that they faced. Our own Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he faced, and also, you mentioned there, Hussein radiallahu anhu and the Sahaba, what they faced. They also faced difficult times, and there is also sacrifices being made across the world as well as we speak. Now, it might be that we don't hear about it, but sacrifices are being made and people are trying to make a difference. But it's sometimes when it's a small pebble in a huge wave, it sometimes does not get seen. But that shouldn't mean that we give up, meaning that we in our own communities, for example, in our own houses, the community starts with the house. So we look at our own house. How much are we practicing Islam? What are we doing? What changes are we making in our own houses? Is what we're eating halal? Is what we're, teaching our children? Are we just giving secular education a priority and not religious education? And then once we fix the unit, yani the house, we can then obviously start to look beyond the house to our own streets. So when we look at our own streets, are our streets a sign of goodness and cleanliness? Are our streets clean? What's the level of crime on our streets? Are there drugs taking place on the streets we live on? These are questions we have to ask. We don't need to look as far as Syria or Pakistan or Iraq or anywhere else for that matter. We look at our own houses and our own streets. Once we start to remedy these things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all powerful. He can change things literally in the matter of seconds. However, the movement and the effort has to come from us. So I hope that's been some reassurance and some guidance as to how we should approach things. But despair is something that we don't do as a community. So I know that we have another call awaiting, so I will just leave that answer there, inshallah. So dear caller, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you.
This was exactly the point. You took the words out of my mouth. This was my response to the sister. Firstly, we have to look at our own houses, at our own children. If you start thinking like that, you get into a depressive state. If you start thinking about that, or what can we do for that and this and that, mashallah, firstly, you're allowed to speak Urdu, Punjabi?
I'm sure you can, yes, inshallah. It's just whether the audience can fully understand it, but Urdu might be better.
ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਸਿੱਧੇ ਕਰਨੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਟਰੀਟਾਂ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਬਾਣਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੈਂ ਮੂਵਡ ਆਊਟ ਹੋਈਆਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਏਰੀਆ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਲਾ ਇਲਾਹਾ ਇਲlallah ਮੁਹੰਮਦ ਰਸੂਲ ਸਕੂਲ ਹੈ ਮਸਜਿਦ ਹੈ 3 ਸਕੂਲ ਹਨ
ਜੀ
ਕੋਈ ਹਰ ਬੱਚਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਦੁਕਾਨਾਂ ਚੋਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਕ੍ਰਿਸਪਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਾਕਟ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਰੋਟਾ ਪਰਸੈਂਟ ਸੀ ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਏਰੀਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਗੋਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਏਰੀਆ ਮੂਵ ਗਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਸਿਗਰਟ ਲਈ 10 ਸਟਰੀਟਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ
ਜੀ it's
The first thing in Islam is cleanliness.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Mashallah, barakallah feek. I'm glad that I got the answer in there, and you've kind of got, re-agreed with it. That's very essential, brothers and sisters. Let's not look beyond our own houses. Let's not look beyond our own streets. It's important that we make change from the beginning. We should be a community that other people want to move into our community. We should not be a community where people want to move out from our community. There's the phrase white flight, meaning that as soon as brown or black people move into an area, then the white people leave that area for whatever reason. Now, we can't stop certain members of the white community who are racist. That's who they are. That's how they will be. However, even them, They can change when they look at our behavior, when they see from our own example how we teach our children, whether they use offensive language, whether they make excessive noise, whether they're being a nuisance on the streets, whether they're hanging about on street corners where people feel uncomfortable to walk past. I'm not talking here about non-Muslim white people walking past here. I'm talking about even Muslim sisters feel uncomfortable to walk past. So, it's important that we take these messages. We do not despair. We do not reach into a kind of a pit of depression, but rather we become positive. We turn that negativity into positivity. I have got another caller who's just called in, inshallah. So let's take that call. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear caller.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Mufti Sahab, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, sir. Loud and clear.
Alhamdulillah. A pleasure to speak to you. First time I'm seeing you on Iqra TV. I don't know much about you, but anyway, alhamdulillah, you're there. I know you just touched a matter of drug dealing and so on. I'm one of those people lived in the UK, in London primarily, for the last 50 years. I'm from Pakistan. Now, what I see in London, maybe all over UK, young people, young Muslims from various countries. I won't name the countries, but a lot of young people, they're into selling drugs. A lot of young people into taking drugs. And quite often you see the same people, the drug sellers, come in for Jummah Salat every Friday. And once they finish with Jummah, they're back on the streets working all day from early afternoon till well past midnight, selling drugs on the main roads. Now, I know the police, they have a huge task in hand, and they try the best to control the situation. But because these people are primarily Muslims, I want to know what roles of masjids are playing, because we're very happy to build a masjid, and we say there's so many masjids in the UK, mashallah, in every locality. But is the masjid only catering for those people who come to the masjid and the imams lead their salat and so on, and they welcome them at Ramadan and so on? Or should the masjid be doing more active work and trying to educate these people, going onto the streets and saying to them, what you're doing is bad, you're dishonoring Islam, you should not do it. Please, I don't see any of that ever happening.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah fiqh. Jazakumullah khairan there, brother. Yeah, I have been on Iqra TV many years ago, but I was on a hiatus, a sabbatical for a few years, but hopefully, inshallah, I'm back here to stay. In terms of the question itself and the response, I fully, in fact, I say that, the number of masajids we have now, really, there should be such a huge change within particular inner cities that, it should be remarkable. If there were so many laundrettes in a particular area, you would think everybody would wear clean clothes. Like we have so many takeaways, that's why everybody is unfortunately walking around with a pot belly. But the question, the point you raised about the masajid, the role of the masajid. Now let's not forget, the role of the masjid is that it should be community run for the community. That's essential. Now, sometimes unfortunately the poor Imam Sahib becomes the scapegoat. Remember, the Imam Sahib is an employee. He's employed there by the masjid committee, and they have employed him and they've given him the role that they've given him. Now, I'm not going to, whine about the wage structure that exists for the imam and the roles he must play. So let's park that to one side. So the masjid itself, what is the role of the masjid? Now, the masjid is not restricted to just the imam, for example, leading on any event or activity which takes place in the masjid. That masjid, if it has kind of buildings associated with it, where you can have youth centers, where you can have other facilities, that's fine. Remember, the masjid itself is a place of worship. That's key. It was designated and defined as a place of worship. There should be other facilities that the community should fund. Now, we have tried that, and I speak with experience, but when you want to build a masjid and you give the hadith of that person who builds a masjid on earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will build them a masjid in Jannah, then you see people donating. Unfortunately, when you start to say, look, we will open a youth club and we'll take these youngsters off the streets, there's hardly any interest there, unfortunately. That's the reality. And that's just what happens. So we've got, as a community, to turn our focus away that, yes, we've got our places of worship, alhamdulillah, and there should be the actual heart of our community. But we also need these other facilities which the brother speaks about. And that is these facilities so that we can educate and change our children themselves. So these are things. Now that can happen within the masjid structure. So you can have volunteer groups, sisters groups, male groups, youth groups, where they can look at these sorts of areas. I know some good practice that's already taking place, where on a weekend there's a karate club, or on a weekend there's pizza and football or something like that. Maybe pizza is not a good choice. Maybe they should be looking at some grilled chicken with salad or something. But the point is that they're looking at ways to do that. But unfortunately, that also then falls on the Imam Sahib. But it shouldn't do. Imam Sahib is there for religious advice and religious guidance. See, that doesn't mean he has to do everything. That's his role, for religious advice and religious guidance. And as long as we are under his purview, as long as we are under his instructions, then we can look at these sorts of things. So I say, yes, the masjid is there, but this is a case of it's a community community establishment for the community. So the community should buy into that and look at ways of, inshallah, making those changes for our community, for our youngsters. Yes, it will exist. And this is something else when the brother touched upon the fact of selling drugs and buying drugs. We buy drugs, or young people buy drugs, or whoever buys drugs, as a form of escapism, because they're not happy with the life that they have. Now, that life that they have could be because they're living in poverty. And we do sit at the bottom in the socio-economic scale of things. We're not necessarily educated to the extent of our peers. So as a result, the jobs that we may get are very low paid. Now we have this kind of materialistic ambitions as well, where we want to drive flashy cars, we want to live in big houses, but unfortunately the pay is not going to live up to that. Now, had we had an Islamic upbringing, and like the sister mentioned about right at the beginning, about qurbani and sacrifice, then we would make that. And I'm sure the brother will agree with me. He mentioned that he arrived from Pakistan 50 years or so ago, but he will be the first one to say about the sacrifices that the generations made when they first arrived. My parents, for example, when they arrived on these shores, when they arrived in Sheffield and then Bradford, they had to set up from scratch. Nothing, just a suitcase. But alhamdulillah, they educated their children, they live in a house and whatever. So they made their sacrifices. Now, you see, we want things quick. We've got the materialistic kind of ambitions, but not necessarily the socio-economic background. And also, we don't have that morality. But anyway, we could carry on talking for a lot longer. But I'm sure you'll be happy to hear that I am back tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. Same time, same place. So we can carry on these discussions tomorrow. Get your Q's ready. And hopefully, inshallah, I'll have some A's ready. And we can discuss this further. And then, inshallah ta'ala, I'm back on the Sunday, all being well, weather permitted, and this is going to be the format for the following few weeks, or several few weeks and months leading up to Ramadan. So please join me again, inshallah, tomorrow. Jazakumullah khairan for listening. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.